Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. So if we could ask everyone to direct themselves to their seats, that would be great. It's great to see you all. We have Katie McFarland here with us tonight, who will get a proper introduction momentarily. Yes, please. So I just want to give a quick introduction of myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Ryan, and I am the co-president of Burger Republicans. This is Burger Republicans' very first speaker event since we reinstated back in February, so I'm very proud of where this club is headed, and I'm very excited for the future. I am also a former intern at the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women, who is sponsoring this event along with Mr. Keith Work. I can attest that this internship was probably the best experience of my life. So if there are any questions about getting involved with Burger Republicans or with the Luce Center, please come by me after the event and I will be happy to tell you all more. So now I would like to invite Kaylee Tierczak, our fundraising chair, up to the podium to introduce Katie.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kaylee Tierczak, and I'm from Garwood, New Jersey. I'm currently a sophomore pursuing a double major in both psychology and accounting. I would like to begin today by thanking the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women for generously funding today's event and making it possible. I also want to welcome you all to our first campus speaker hosted by the Muhlenberg Republicans since our reestablishment last year. It is truly an honor and a privilege to introduce Katie McFarland to you all tonight. Last month, I had the pleasure of listening to Katie McFarland in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Luce Center's National Summit. Katie McFarland is one of the country's best-known foreign policy experts and a key architect of conservative national security strategy. As President Trump's Deputy National Security Advisor in his first term, she played a pivotal role in shaping the America First and Peace Through Strength doctrine. Katie has been a news commentator for decades, appearing on Fox News, Fox Business News, Newsmax, and many other national and international news organizations. She frequently appears on podcasts, documentaries, and even radio. As a best-selling author, her book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, offers profound insights into the Trump presidency, US and China relations, and American exceptionalism. Katie's career spans 5 decades, beginning as a White House aide to Dr. Henry Kissinger in the Nixon and Ford administration, and culminating at the National Security Council with President Trump. She served in the Pentagon as a senior speechwriter, press spokesperson, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration. Her notable achievements include drafting the Weinberg Doctrine and contributing to President Reagan's iconic Star Wars speech. For her service, she received the Defense Department's highest civilian honor, the Distinguished Service Award. In 2015, she was named Women of the Year by the Luce Center. She's beloved by students and a frequently requested campus speaker. KT holds a BA in Chinese Studies from George Washington University and an MA in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics from Oxford. She also completed PhD coursework at MIT, where she focused on nuclear weapons, China, and the Soviet Union. She and her husband have been married for 40 years with 5 children and 11 grandchildren. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Katie McFarland.
Thank you so much. I've got to tell you, a couple of months ago, we met, Jen and we all met in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Claire Booth Luce weekend event. And Jen said, well, I think you should come to Muhlenberg College. And I said, oh, you mean that left-wing liberal place? And she said, yeah, it's going to be terrific. And I said, okay, who's providing the security? And so as a result, here I am, and I'm very excited to see that we have a lot of people in the audience who are probably going to represent a diversity of opinion. And I am really happy to take on all of your questions one way or another, as long as we're all polite. So I'm thrilled to be here. I should tell you, so all those fancy titles, what does all that mean? When I was, I was President Trump's Deputy National Security Advisor. And the way foreign policy and government works is there are really 3 people that count. There's a Secretary of State, and that's the person who goes around, is Marco Rubio, and he goes around the world meeting with counterparts, doing a lot of negotiation for the president. Then there's a national security advisor. We currently do not have one. Marco Rubio holds both the hats. But the national security advisor is the person who's at the president's elbow and goes to every meeting with him. If there's a crisis, that's the action officer for the crisis. But then there's a deputy national security advisor, which was my job, and that's the person who's supposed to take a step back and be the thought person. So that whoever the president is, he'll have campaign slogans, peace through strength, or drill baby drill. And the deputy national security advisor is the one who's supposed to take those campaign slogans and turn them into a coherent policy and work with the agencies of government to carry it out. So that was my job. And one of the reasons that I liked President Trump, and I've been around Republican politics since I was 18 years old and worked in the White House for Henry Kissinger, who was my boss on the National Security Council. So I was about as traditional a Republican as you could get, working for Nixon, Ford, Reagan. But I had grown very disillusioned with the Republican Party and the leadership, especially on the foreign policy issues, by about 2005 or 6, because I thought we were in a hopeless forever wars in the Middle East, and we were not paying attention to the one place we really should have focused on, which was China. And so, I'd been briefing presidential candidates and Senate candidates for decades, and I was not terribly excited about who was running in 2008. Wasn't terribly excited about who was going to run in 2012 and then 2016. But then Trump came along, and I'm a New Yorker, so I had known him from New York, and he was really different because he kept talking about China, 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 and I thought, whoa, there's somebody who I think actually understands the real threat is going to come from the strategic threat that would really change the way our life, if we don't deal with it, will change the way the next 100 years of the United States of America and our global leadership if we don't pay attention to China. So I told him I thought he was doing a good job. And so then I worked on his campaign. I did some briefings. And I was struck during the briefings by how different he was. Now remember, I briefed everybody. I've been around every major, certainly Republican candidate for decades. And Trump had a very different approach, and it was a businessman's approach. So I would go in to try to brief him about China, and this is China's geostrategic position, and this is how many weapons they have and how many battleships. And he would say, I don't care about that. What is their GNP? What are they manufacturing? What's our balance of trade payments? And I thought, this is a different kind of candidate. This is somebody I think could shake things up. So when he was elected, surprise election in 2016, I did go to work for him, and he did shake things up. Now, why and how did he do it? And why was it important that he did it? I think he came to a couple of realizations by 2015-16, that the United States could not continue along the same route, that we were underwriting the national security, in other words, paying for the national security expenses of our allies, and we were giving everybody else, other countries that we traded with, favorable treatment in our trade. So we may have had free trade, but it wasn't fair trade, that the United States in almost every circumstance was at a disadvantage to our own economy. And because we were spending so much money after September 11th, we had an expansion of the national security state. After the banking crisis of 2008, an expansion of the social welfare state, that we were all of a sudden, every year spending $2 trillion more than we were taking in. And as a result, we were having no economic growth. So I think that when Trump looked at all that as a businessman, he said, this is not going to work. This cannot be sustained. Something's got to give. And what was giving was the United States was no longer going to be growing economically. And so he set out to smash the system, to smash the global system of trade. And he understood two things that most politicians, they don't think about the business part of it, they think about the politics part of it. But he thought of as a businessman, he said there are two things that have changed that give the United States an amazing competitive advantage with other countries that we're not taking advantage of. One is that every country needs to sell its manufactured goods into the United States. If you're China and you can't sell into the United States, you're broke. If you're India and you can't sell your products into the United States, you're broke. If you're Vietnam, everybody's got to sell their goods in the United States. And if every one of you looked at the label on their clothes, they're all going to be made somewhere else. Nothing's made in America. So as a result of that, Trump realized that this would give us enormous leverage, that we could threaten to cut off the trade. We could threaten a country and say, we're not going to let you sell your, stuff on Amazon, and that they would then have to, we could use that as leverage to get a lot of sort of renegotiate our trade deals. He also understood a second thing, which was energy. That the United States had an abundant, for various reasons in the last 10 years, have had an abundance of oil and natural gas. And we could produce it, get it out of the ground, refine it, produce it, sell it at a price that was cheaper, better, safer, cleaner than any other country. So in a world where energy makes all the difference of every kind of manufacturing, and even before AI, even before the demands, the supercomputer demands of quantum computing, that the fact that we could be self-sufficient in our energy gave us another point of an enormous leverage, that we could manufacture things again, we could use that independence that our own being energy independent would give us, and that frankly, we could become the dominant part of the world for supplying energy to the whole world. You wouldn't have to be Saudi Arabia or Iran or Russia. Actually, it could be oil and natural gas coming from America. So with those two weapons in his hands, he decided to remake the global system. And so that, I think, is what he tried to do it in his first term. He got sort of halfway there. Didn't finish he couldn't finish it largely because of all the impeachment activities, but then the second term didn't happen because it was Joe Biden's term. So now Trump's second term, and he's bringing back all of those policies, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to blow up the trading system in the globe and rewrite every trading deal the United States has, but to do it fairly so that it's a reciprocal trade relationship. I'll give you one example. So Germans could sell their cars to America, and there would be a 5% tariff tax. America could sell its cars in Germany, but there would be a 25% tax. So figure that out, right? So no American car is going to be competitive in Germany. And every car coming from Germany to the United States is going to be really competitive. So we did all that deliberately. It's not just that we're stupid. We did it quite deliberately at the end of World War II. And why we did it was the people who were in charge at the end of World War II said, okay, World War I, we had to, if America hadn't entered World War I, the Allied powers were going to lose. And then World War II happens. If the United States had not entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, the Germans would have won, and Western civilization would have been greatly changed. So the guys in the late 1940s, early 1950s said, okay, how are we going to prevent World War III? Because we know we'd be dragged into a global war. How do we prevent World War III from happening, especially because communism from the Soviet Union and socialism and communism seemed to be being very well received in Europe. So they came up with this global system where we would pay. That we would pay for everybody's security. We would have a NATO alliance where we would pay 75–80% of the bill, but the European countries would be protected. We came up with a trade system where, like I just said, Germany, other countries, Japan, Korea, France, name your country, could trade with us at a very favorable terms. Our economy was sacrificed so that their economies could be rebuilt. And we did it deliberately, and it was quite a success. And the reason it was a success was all those countries then rebuilt their economies, they rebuilt their societies, they recovered from World War II, but frankly, they got really used to it. So when our presidents, Barack Obama called the Europeans freeloaders in NATO, he said, pay your fair share, and they never did. And so what happened was that all these countries, our allies, trading partners and military allies, they all decided they didn't really want to have to step up and do their fair share. When we did these deals originally in the 1950s, they were never meant to be permanent. I mean, how many of you here are students? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you have children who are students or were students? Okay, the few of us. So when your kids go to college, you say, okay, I'm going to underwrite your college experience. You can live at home. I'll do your laundry. But we expect you to eventually graduate from college and then get a job and then be self-sufficient. We are not going to be doing your laundry when you're 30. We are not going to be paying for your rent when you're 35. And so the United States has the same attitude towards our allies. Say, well, we expected you to kind of, get on your feet and start, paying for your fair share. And they weren't. So that's what Trump wanted to upend. And that's why every single trade deal he's done, he's renegotiated almost every trade relationship we have, and he's said to each of the countries, you want to sell your goods in the United States? Then we expect fair tariff. You have this tariff, we have this tariff, they're going to be reciprocal. We're not going to underwrite you anymore. You're paying your fair share. And each country had to agree because they needed to sell their goods in the American market. As a result of that, I think we've had extremely successful trade deals with all of these countries. The other thing that I think Trump understood was that there had been no reinvestment in United States manufacturing. So you're from a part of, or at least you're going to college in a part of the country which used to be very, very prosperous and is less so now. You're really on the edge of the Rust Belt. All those manufacturing jobs, the 20, 30, 40 years ago, which made America great, were gone. And a lot of them they were gone because the investments were made in building new factories, not in Allentown, Pennsylvania, but in Shanghai. So Trump realized that we needed to get investment back into the United States. But how are you going to do that? And so when he's been renegotiating all these trade deals with countries, he's also written into the small print, you are going to build your next factory in Allentown, Pennsylvania. You're going to build your factories in America. America is going to make stuff again. Now, maybe we're not going to make stuff like we did in the 1950s. We're going to make sophisticated stuff. But we are going to have manufacturing jobs back in the country. And so he has now gotten pledges as of this afternoon, pledges of $19 trillion of investment that's going to come into the United States. It's not here yet. Some of it started, but it is coming. And that will be a revitalization of manufacturing in the United States. And it'll be tech manufacturing. It's going to be high-tech manufacturing. And so as I look at it, so where are we now? What's going to happen with all this sort of blow up the system, remake the system? I think he's doing a terrific job. And I don't think we've seen the results of it yet, in the sense that you're not feeling it in your pocketbooks. In fact, probably you're feeling more pain than you are reward. But I think that we're on the right trajectory to remake the American economy, to remake American technology so that we remain the global leader of technology. And I think that it will put the United States in a terrific position for your generation for the next 20 and 30 years. Now, I think what I'd like to do, so that's the sort of underpinning of what he's trying to do, and I think he's succeeded very well. There's another layer to it, though, is different countries and different crises and the war and peace thing. And I'd like to talk about that for a minute or two. And then I'd like to just throw it open to questions, because that's your job, right? You're supposed to be asking questions, and you're supposed to be thinking for yourselves. And so I want to talk about what's happened with our allies. So as I said, he's renegotiating all the trade deals. He's also renegotiating all the security deals. So to the Europeans, Trump, in his first term, he went to our European allies and he said, look, you guys aren't paying your fair share. I expect you to pay 2% of your GNP towards defense. And they all laughed and they said, that's not going to happen. And there's a famous picture of Trump like this, and with the German leader like this, and they're all shaking, and they're really angry at Trump, and he's just mad as could be that they're not doing their fair share. My job was to go to my counterparts, the German and the French, et cetera, counterparts, and say to them, 2% of your GNP, you're going to have to give that to our common defense. No more freeloading. And my German counterpart looked at me right in the eye, and he said, oh, that's so naive. That's so unrealistic. We're not going to be paying 2% of our GNP towards defense. Fast forward, Ukraine war. Guess what? The Germans are eagerly paying 5% of their GNP to defense. So we have been able to renegotiate these deals, and we have found that when we didn't have any leverage, we now do have an enormous amount of leverage, and that's why we're redoing everything. One of the most successful things that Trump did, I think, was his Middle East policy. So the first week of the first term, we're all sitting in the White House Situation Room. It's not a very big room. I mean, and the Situation Room table is about the size of a big dining room table that can hold 20 people. And Trump's at one end, and I'm there, and the Secretary of State, Treasurer, all around the room. And at any new administration, the normal thing is for the team to review foreign policy. You know, what was our policy under the previous administration towards this country? Should we continue it? And particularly so when you change parties. So Trump comes in after Obama, and then we're going around the table saying, okay, what about the Middle East? What about Saudi Arabia? And so my job was to brief everybody, and I said, well, they're going through a generational leadership struggle, and it's the old guys, the 70 or 80-year-old guys. We've done business with them forever. They're pretty good with us about oil and stuff, but they're a little terrorist adjacent. You know, they kind of look the other way about the terrorist thing, but that's who we've always done business with. And then Jared Kushner, who's Trump's son-in-law, is in his late 30s at the time. He said, yeah, but there's a new generation. And I said, yes, I know, but they're so young. They're so untested. And he said, well, you know, they're not that young because the majority of 75% of their population in these countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all the Gulf Arabs, is under the age of 30. So for the people of that country, the 30-year-old guys are their contemporaries. They're not young. And so then I said, okay. And then Jared Kushner said, well, you know, we should talk to these young guys. In fact, we are going to talk to these young guys. And they would come into the West Wing of the White House by the side door, you know, the flowing robes. And they would come in and they would sit down and we would talk Turkey about what do you see, what do you envision for your countries. And so President Trump made the decision within the first couple of days of his term to say, okay, Saudi Arabia, you have that young guy, Mohammed bin Salman. Let's give him a shot. Let's give him a chance. Let's see. If he is going to be good, we don't know, he's untested. But if he is going to deliver on all these things he's promised, this could be the beginning of a great relationship. So what did Mohammed bin Salman promise? He said, we're going to cut ties with terrorist groups. We're going to combat Islamic extremism in their world. We're going to look to diversify our economies. We're not just going to sell oil. We want to be tech centers. I mean, these are guys, you know, who a generation ago were living in tents in the desert and riding camels. And then all of a sudden, this young 30-year-old guy says, well, we want to be a tech superpower. And then he promised, he said, we want to open our societies. We want to have women's rights and all this stuff. And it sounded crazy. It sounded like such a pipe dream. But Trump said, okay, I'm willing to take the bet. And he did. And as a result of that, Trump then, his first foreign trip of his first term was to go to Saudi Arabia and see that young 30-year-old guy and talk to him and, you know, treat him and give him a lot of street cred. As a result, Mohammed bin Salman was able to consolidate his position. He did become the leader. He's now the deputy crown prince. The king of Saudi Arabia is extremely old and frail and it's dementia. And so Mohammed bin Salman, who is at the White House tonight, will likely be the next king of Saudi Arabia. But what he's done in 8 years is he's changed the complexion of the Middle East. He's gotten rid of the mullahs, gotten rid of the Islamic extremists. He's invested in technology. He's opened the society. I mean, women didn't just get the right to drive. Women got the right to have jobs. So that when President Trump, in his second term, the first trip he takes back to Saudi Arabia, and it was for a conference, and you know what? The conference was opened by a woman. 3 years before, women couldn't drive in that country, and they would never have been allowed to preside over a conference of men. And so that society has changed a lot. But the most important way it changed is in pushing the other Arab countries. This is the rich Gulf Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. You don't have to worry about their names. But these were the countries that Trump wanted and Mohammed bin Salman pushed for the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are a peace deal between Israel and the Arab countries. There has not been peace between Israel and the Arab countries for thousands of years. Before Muhammad, they were fighting each other, the Philistines, you know, or the Palestinian tribes of today. So as a result of that bet that Trump took early in his first term, he's now been able to have not just the Abraham Accords, but a month ago, the Gaza peace plan, which nobody thought would have a prayer. I mean, we've been chasing peace in the Palestinian, in Gaza and the West Bank for decades. My boss, Henry Kissinger, did shuttle diplomacy. I went on the shuttle diplomacy trips, trying to get Israel to talk to the other guys to talk to us. None of them wanted peace. Trump pulled it off. And the way he pulled it off was simply brilliant, because what he did was he's got a 20-point peace plan. And in the 20-point peace plan is all the stuff about, ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. But the brilliant part of it was he separated Hamas from the Palestinian people. We've all seen the pictures of the suffering of the Palestinian people, and it's horrible. But a lot of the suffering has been brought about by their own leaders, which is Hamas. So that 20-point peace plan says Hamas has to give up its weapons, and it can have no part of the future government of Gaza and the Palestinian people. Now, that sounds terrific, right? But nobody thought the other countries in the region would go along with it. But that young guy, Mohammed bin Salman, got all the other Arab leaders to say, okay, we go along with that. We don't want Hamas. We want Hamas out. We want to help the Palestinian people, but Hamas is gone. As a result of that, 3 days ago at the United Nations Security Council, they voted to adopt the Trump's Gaza peace plan. I think it's going to work. It's not going to be, there'll be bumps. But at the end of the day, we could, in a year or two from now, look at a Middle East which for the first time in hundreds, if not thousands of years, is at peace. And is trading, as Trump says, they're going to trade chaos for commerce. They're going to trade terror for technology. And where you could see a Middle East in 2 or 3 or 5 years is Israeli technology. So Israel's called the startup nation. It's like the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, is Israel. And yet there's a lot of energy in all the Arab countries because of the oil. So you could see a marriage between Israeli technology, energy that's coming from the Arab countries, and we know that with quantum computing you need a lot more energy than you did even today, and that those two together could make the whole Middle East become a thriving, prosperous, peaceful part of the world. And if the Middle East is at peace, I mean, when you think through, think about the globe. Where is the Middle East located? It's at the crossroads of everything. It's a crossroads of trade between Europe and Asia, between Africa and Europe and Asia. If the Middle East is at peace, the entire world is in a much safer and more prosperous position than ever before. And I credit all of that to Donald Trump. It would never have happened under another leader. And a lot of it happened because Donald Trump looked at a 30-year-old guy and said, okay, I'm gonna back you. And now that 30-year-old guy just invested $1 trillion in the United States. You know what that's going to mean? You're going to have jobs. There are going to be good jobs for American Gen Zers as they enter the workforce. And a lot of it will be technology jobs. So that's the Middle East. I've told you the underlying plan is to blow it up and rewrite it. The next part of it is to make peace where you can. And then I think I'd like to sort of finish with one example of how he's used these tariffs to get peace. So Pakistan and India, both nuclear powers, have been fighting with each other, border skirmishes, especially in Kashmir, for, hundreds of years. And there was a crisis about 4 months ago when it looked like they were actually potentially going to go to war. So Trump jumps in the middle, and he says and remember, Pakistan and India both have to export goods to the United States. I'm sure if you looked in your label, it'll be made in Pakistan, made in India, pull out your cell phone, made in India. And so Trump says, you guys cut it out. We don't want two powers, potential nuclear powers, to go to war. And they said, no, it's his fault. No, it's his fault. And Trump said, I don't care whose fault it is. Pakistan, we're going to slap a 350% tariff on any goods made in Pakistan coming into the United States. Pakistani leaders said, well, we're bankrupt within a week. And then he said, I don't care, just stop the war. And he goes to the Indian, President Modi, and he said, unless you stop this fighting over Kashmir, 350% tariff on your goods, no iPhones are going to be sold in the United States that are made in India. So the two leaders hated each other. And they were forced, because of economic necessity, to deal with each other. And they both walked back from the brink, to the point where Trump gave a press conference this afternoon. I was listening to it as I was driving from Long Island. And he was talking about the phone call he had with the Pakistani leader. And he said, yeah, I said to the guy, 350% tariff, you're going to go broke in a week unless you go to the negotiating table. And then the Pakistani leader said, you know, Mr. President, thank you very much. We never could have gotten there on our own, but you forced us to it. And we're happy. And then President Modi, or Prime Minister Modi of India, called and said basically the same thing. You know, we were kind of tumbling into potential conflict, but because you got so tough with us, and we had no choice but to go to the negotiating table, he said, you know, without you, we could well have, you know, been at war, and two nuclear powers at wars, potentially a very dangerous thing to happen, obviously. And so the fact that Trump could use that tariff threat, and everybody had to pay attention because they couldn't survive for a week without selling their goods to the United States, has made all the difference. The Supreme Court, by the way, is judging right now whether those tariffs are legal, whether Trump has the authority to just turn to the Indian Prime Minister and say 350% tariff, or whether Congress has to. And that'll probably be the most consequential decision the Supreme Court has made in, 50 years, as to whether a president of the United States can himself alone exercise tariff power. Time will tell. But the other example I'll give you about the tariffs is that the Colombia or Costa Rica, I think it's Colombia, had said that they were mad at Trump for something. This was early in the first term, or early in the second term. And Trump said, well, I'm going to slap a tariff on you unless you renegotiate the tariff and renegotiate our trade agreement. And they said, no, we're not, we don't believe you, and we're calling your bluff. So Trump said, and he announced, he said, tomorrow morning, all goods coming from this country are going to have a 25% tariff. And so the leader of that country, by the way, one of their biggest exports was fresh flowers. You know, when you go to the grocery store and the fresh flowers, they're not coming from down the road. They're coming from Costa Rica. They're coming from Colombia. They're coming from South America. And so the president of that country said, oh my God, we're not going to be able to sell our flowers in, supermarkets in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And so Trump calls Marco Rubio and says, okay, so I just gave him a 25% tariff hike. Why don't you go talk to him? Why don't you get him on the phone, talk to him in Spanish, and see how they're thinking? I'm going to play golf, click. And so Trump goes, and so by the third hole, Marco Rubio says, okay, well, I've got a call coming up with him. What do you want me to say? Trump says, hang tough, 25% tariff, no flowers in the grocery store. Fourth hole, fifth hole, sixth hole. So by the seventh hole, Marco Rubio calls back and says, okay, he's agreed. He's going to, renegotiate the deal. You're going to lift the tariff, right? And Trump says, yeah, but here's what I want in exchange. We've got some hardened criminals, gang members. We don't want them in America. We want to expatriate them back to their country of origin. And so Marco Rubio says, okay, I'll get right back to you. Click. Eighth hole, ninth hole. Trump gets a call from the golf cart. And Marco Rubio says, okay, he's met all of our demands. We can repatriate the hardened criminals, and he's going to send the plane to pick them up just so everything goes well. Click. So by the time the 18th hole was completed, the United States had a new trade agreement with that country, and we had the worst of the gangbangers were sent back, and everybody lived happily ever after. So I think that I'm giving these examples because it sounds, if you look in the media, it looks like Trump's nuts, right? He's like, oh, 300% tariff, or oh, we're going to do this, and it looks very scattered. But it's very deliberately thought out, and he knows that just the mere threat to the president of Colombia or Costa Rica that you're not going to be able to sell your flowers into the United States market will bankrupt them within a week, gives Trump enormous leverage. So we've been able to rewrite these trade deals. It has cost us nothing. We didn't send in the Marines. We didn't have to endanger our economies, and yet he's been able to use that as leverage. I think that's a tough, hard New York real estate businessman with the sharpest elbows you've ever seen, and the good news is those are elbows working for us. So I'm very keen on President Trump. I know that there are various opinions, and I'm looking forward to having all of you ask me questions, and I'll stand up here and defend, or not defend, as I think is appropriate. So thank you very much, and let's have some questions. Let's have fun. Oh, and tell me, by the way, who you are. First of all, is everybody, how many people have to come to this lecture tonight? Like you're getting course credit for it? Oh, so the rest of you are just here voluntarily? Sort of, kind of? Nothing else to do? Okay, Wednesday night. Okay, so go ahead.
All right, so can everybody hear this? Yes. All right, so I'm the co-president of Muhlenberg College Republicans, and thank you so much for coming here to speak with us. I just want to say a huge thank you on behalf of our club, and I'm sure everyone here, despite political backgrounds, have learned so much from you just coming up here and giving your personal insights. So thank you so much from everyone here. And now we're going to have the Q&A portion of this. So everyone can either line up here single file or come up as you feel moved if you have a question. So yeah, does anybody want to start us off? If anyone, member of our e-board would like to, of course.
This was actually part of the quiz. I said that they had to have at least 3 questions or I was going to go home unhappy. Okay, yes.
Hi, KT. I'm Kellyanne. I'm Vice President of the College Republicans here. And I was wondering, public figures often have their personal lives thrust into the spotlight, sometimes weaponized in ways unrelated to their actual work. How have you navigated the politicization of your personal life, and what strategies have helped you manage hostility or criticism in the public arena?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the job, right? And if you haven't done anything wrong, they'll make it up. Somebody's going to accuse you of something or other because they don't want to debate you on the issues. So how do you keep your head? I think part of it is don't ever read your own press. So if somebody's writing, oh my God, what a brilliant choice. I mean, one of my daughters said, Mom, when you were appointed by President Trump, like the whole world was so excited because you were so well qualified and he hadn't had a lot of other people who were part of the foreign policy establishment support him. I didn't want to hear it. Because if you hear it, then you start believing it. And you don't want to ever believe your good press because it's not always going to be good. It's going to go in the other direction. You don't want to have that hurt you. I think the second thing is to really have strong relationships. I mean, there's a really cute 80-year-old, 85, 40-year-old guy in the back with a bow tie. We've been married for 40 years, 5 children, 11 grandchildren later. And he's been my sustaining force in my life. And there were times that it was really hard. I mean, during the Russia investigation, the Mueller investigation, I was targeted. I mean, the guy who was running it said, we want to get KT McFarland. She hadn't done anything wrong, but we want to get her because we know she's the brains behind the operation. And we're not sure how we're going to get her. We'll find a crime. And what they wanted me to do was to plead guilty to a crime I hadn't committed, perjury. And if I wouldn't plead guilty, they were just going to keep making subpoenas and subpoenas and subpoenas. They wanted me to plead guilty for a crime I didn't commit. What they really wanted me to do was to say President Trump had committed a crime, which I knew he hadn't committed. And there was a really hard moment, I mean, the hardest night of my life, when we're sitting in the office of our New York lawyer, and the Mueller investigators called and said that they expected me to go in Washington the next day, and they were going to maybe charge me with a crime. I didn't know what the crime was yet. And so I turned to my husband and I said, God, I mean, we're paying for my legal defense. This is going to cost us, and nobody's, insurance doesn't reimburse you, and nobody reimburses you, and it's going to cost us, over $1 million. I mean, that's our retirement plan. And my husband said to me, he said, and maybe I should just lie and say that I lied, just to get him off my back. They're going to hound me to my grave. And he said, no, you really can't do that. I know you'll never live with yourself if you do that. And so we told our lawyer, look, just tell them I look good in orange. If they want to charge a 74-year-old grandmother with a crime she didn't commit, I guess come and get me. And then they went away. They disappeared. But it was a really hard time. And I think if I didn't have the support of my husband and my family, I might have made a different decision, and then I never could have lived with myself. So whatever you do in life, and whether it's in politics or, whatever you choose to do, if you can have that part of your life, have that strong and sustaining relationship, it's the single most important thing that could happen. And finally, that strong and supportive relationship, and my wonderful husband of 40-some years, he told me to just listen to that voice inside, because you all have it. And just listen to what's right, and then do what's right. And then I don't think people have ever regretted doing the right thing for the right reason, even though it might be really hard at the time. And even though, I think God has a plan. Sometimes I think it's a shitty plan, but it always ends up working out well in the end. So it's worked out pretty well for me. Thank you. Thank you.
What's up? I just wanted to thank you so much for coming in all the way
Thank you.
from Pennsylvania and coming in for this session. You spoke about energy, and I kind of wanted to quickly touch on that. In particular, how the United States is approaching renewable energy under this new administration.
Yeah.
With President Trump pulling us out of the Paris Climate Treaty, and as a result, America was entirely absent from the recent climate conference in Brazil. China has taken center stage, becoming a global leader in renewable energy. Meanwhile, America seems to be increasingly concerned with all forms of energy, such as oil, gas, and coal. In the long term, as the rest of the world moves away from fossil fuels, does this not leave America at a disadvantage? Even if he isn't particularly concerned about climate change and its impacts on a purely business level, doesn't this lock America out of a massive new market, with some estimates pointing this new market of renewable energy to be around $1.9 to $2 trillion? On a purely business level, does this also not serve America's interests on the long term?
When you mentioned China and their leaders in the renewable solar panels, and do you know what China also does with fossil fuels?
They're a massive emitter.
They what?
They're a massive emitter polluter as well.
They're building a coal power plant a week, and it's the dirtiest coal power plant on the planet.
Right.
Now, if you think that we, and I do think that we are in an energy, we need a lot of energy to power industry. Think about where we are in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months with the demands of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. This is going to hit you so fast. Who's a freshman here or a sophomore? Okay, within a year, certainly by the time you graduate, the world is going to need 2, maybe even 3 times as much energy as we currently have. And you're not going to get it all with fossil fuels. So even though you might think, oh, I want to have a totally renewable energy future, here's where we are now, that's there. It's the infrastructure is not existing now. And you're thinking, well, we're going to build the infrastructure, it'll be a great business of multiple billions of dollars of demand. It could take 5 years under current situation. And with the increased energy demands for artificial intelligence and quantum computing, it's going to take, it's just not there. So are you willing to have the United States completely dependent on renewables when there just isn't enough? Or do you think about a bridge fuel? I look at it and I say, okay, how do you get from here to there? We'd all love to be there. How do you get from here to there? I think you get there with clean liquefied natural gas. Natural gas is clean, it's safe, it's abundant, and it's a lot better than dirty coal, which the Chinese are putting into the atmosphere. So that's one point. I think it's a bridge. You could look at fossil fuels as a bridge. The second point I would make is how much does it really cost? And I think the studies you're quoting are not end costs. If you start calculating all it's so complicated, I don't want to get in the weeds, but in fact, a lot of the numbers that the renewables industry puts out aren't counting how much money it costs to build the facilities to make the renewables. So let's say you have an electric car. Well, where do you think the electricity comes from?
From the grid.
From the grid. How do they get the electricity in the grid?
Through a multitude of different sources.
Okay, what's the predominant source?
Well, depends on where you are particularly, but you probably have a mixture of nuclear, wind, coal.
Okay, the single most, the biggest power source for the grid is coal. And then after that, it's natural gas, it's oil. Nuclear is like a little tiny bit, and fossil fuels is a minuscule part of it. So if you enter in all of the costs of, say, having an electric car, everybody feels great. Oh, I got a Tesla, I got an electric car. In fact, the energy per unit cost is probably more expensive than it would have been if it was a fossil fuel. The other thing I would say, if you're looking for what your future would be, let's say we're going to take a zero emissions stand, like Germany has done or like Britain has done. It's thought that what it has cost Germany economically and growth is that Germany doesn't have economic growth at all. And one of the reasons that Europe is flatlined as an economy is that they've all gone for zero emissions. So if you're willing to sacrifice, if you want to make that sacrifice and say, okay, you know, I'm going to sacrifice my prosperity. I'm going to sacrifice the way of life that I have now because of the climate issue that I feel so strongly about. That's your choice. Vote that way. But I would point out to you that for all Britain has done one of the most forward-thinking zero emissions, I forget what the buzzwords are, but what the Britons have done, and it's thought that they've given up 2 to 3% of economic growth per year for that, is done away with or obliterated within about a month of Chinese emissions. So when Trump talks about it, I think he's right, and he's saying, okay, you know, understand that you can do that, but you're not going to make a big difference on the climate, because until you get countries like China and India to sign on to it as well, you're never going to get there. I mean, China has signed what you're talking about, the Paris Accords. And what is their plan? Their plan is that they would be to zero emissions, I don't know, what's their problem? I mean, like 2050?
They were initially saying.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to get there until, you know, you've got grandchildren. And so I think it's a lot of ways, it's a great and noble, really a noble environment and a noble pursuit. But let's get practical about it. Do you want to give up your way of life for that, knowing that no one else in the world is willing to do that? And then I think the third point I would make is, if you really believe in renewables, how do you all feel about nuclear energy? We think that's good? Are we willing to say, okay, let's really, you know, solar panels, windmills, nuclear energy, no fossil fuels? Well, maybe that's not a bad choice, but most people would probably break out in hives if they thought that we were going to go become a nuclear, and we would predominantly be nuclear energy powered. Now, I want to point out that France is something like 90% of France's energy comes from nuclear power. They're okay with it. I would also point out, we have a daughter in the Navy, we're a Navy family, that the United States Navy has had nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers for 50 years, and there haven't been any accidents. So maybe we should all take a second look at nuclear. But I understand where you're coming from, and I know that that's a very popular opinion to have, but understand that the cost of what you're advocating is your lifestyle for the rest of your lives. And if that's your choice, well, I think it's not my choice, but if that wants to be your choice, then I think you should pursue it. But understand what the full price tag is that you're willing to pay. Thank you.
For the other people.
Thank you. Thank you for that provocative question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Katie. My name is Brian Schechter. I am the club secretary. I'm a senior. When I was looking into your biography before, I started your research for a speaker, but I noticed that you work with the late Dr. Henry Kissinger. Mm-hmm. I am quite fascinated to hear about what you did with him and your relationship with him back in the day.
Okay, so this is a long time ago. When I was, so I had to, as I said, I had to get a job to pay for college. I was a really fast typist. And so I got a job working at night. I went to GW during the day. And at night, I rode my bike to the West Wing of the White House. I went to the White House Situation Room, where I typed the first draft of something called the President's Daily Brief. At the time, I had no idea what it was. It turns out that that was the thing that is presented to every president first thing the next morning. And it's like a highly classified newspaper report of, oh, this happened last night. This is the crisis we're looking at to go forward. So my boss was Henry Kissinger. I was terrified of him. I was 18 years old. He was, on the front page of Time magazine as Super Kissinger, negotiating, peace around the world. And then, but over time, and we kept in touch over the years, and And he was, he was a boss, terrifying boss. And then he became a mentor. And I would say, should I take this job? What do you think about that? And then in the end, he became a friend. And there was one point at which he had never done his oral history. And I was working with the Library of Congress to do the oral history of a lot of the foreign policy officials of the Nixon and Ford administrations. And I was still scared of Henry. I mean, 30 years later, I was still scared. And so he called me and he said, why didn't you interview me for my oral history? I mean, I was the architect of all those foreign policies. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to interview you. And he said, well, how much time do you need? And I said, oh, only an hour. And so we agreed. I got a film crew to come to his office on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and we sat down, and so 1 hour later, we said, well, okay, we'll keep going. I've only gotten up to, the Vietnam War. And so then one session turned into 2 to 5 to 6, and we did a book about it. It was Henry Kissinger's oral history called Kissinger and Kissinger. And there was a certain point at which he said, how long have I known you? And I said, my whole life, all of my adult life. And he said, remind me how old you were when we hired you. And I said, well, actually, I was 18. And he said, why did we hire you when you were 18? And I said, well, actually, it was really simple, because when I interviewed for the job, I was a really good typist. And when the security guys, the FBI guys said, all right, we need to have you fill out this really long form of all the places you've ever lived and all the travel you've ever done. And so I'm being interviewed, and they said, well, where have you traveled to? And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm not going to get this job. This is foreign policy stuff. I've never been abroad. And so I said, well, I'm from Wisconsin. I've been to Indiana, been to Michigan. And they said, no, what's your foreign travel? And I look at them and I said, Jesus, I don't even have a passport. I've never been abroad. And so they said, terrific. We will hire you today because you are the simplest, easiest security clearance we have ever granted to anyone. And so when I told Henry that years later, he laughed and he said, yeah, you didn't know anybody. You couldn't spill any beans. You didn't know anybody. Nobody knew you. Nobody would have believed you. You're 18 years old. So you were an easy hire. So it was really great. And then I was really honored when, well, anyway, he lived to almost 100. And as he became older, and you have no idea. Everybody know who Henry Kissinger is? I mean, we remember, right? But have you read about him in the history books? Anyway, fled Nazi Germany, came to America, was working like a laborer in a bottle brush factory in New York. He was discovered during World War II as a private. He was sponsored to go to Harvard University. He wrote brilliant things about war and peace. And then Richard Nixon hired him to be the national security advisor in probably the most momentous, since today, the momentous period of American foreign policy. It was the first time we had arms control agreements with the Soviet Union. It was the opening to China. It was the end of the Vietnam War. It was the first Middle East diplomacy. So Kissinger became just a legendary guy. And as he got older, he became even smarter. You kept thinking, he's going to have dementia at some point. He's like 98 years old. He's got to be. And he always looked like he was about to die because he was always really overweight and spilled food down his shirt. And so then he got better as he got older because he didn't sweat the small stuff. He would look at the vision. And so what he said was he was really worried about the future. Not because of China, Russia, or any of those. He said he was worried about AI. And he said, I am really worried about artificial intelligence and how it's going to completely transform our society and how it's going to make traditional jobs vanish.
When was this, may I ask? How early was he worried about AI?
He started working with Eric Schmidt, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, wow, so that early.
Yeah, early on. Nobody knew, remember, Google had then Alphabet. Nobody knew what Alphabet was. And so Eric Schmidt, who was head of Google, whatever he was head of, he was like the Bill Gates kind of guy. And Eric Schmidt brought Kissinger along. And but at the end of the day, this is funny, and I've never really told anybody this, but when Henry died, he had a very small funeral. And it was just for family and sort of people who he'd known forever. It wasn't for world leaders. There was later a very ceremonial funeral, but this was to be his funeral and his burial at Arlington Cemetery. And so there were maybe, I don't know, maybe less than 100 of us. Mike Bloomberg was there, Eric Schmidt was there, a couple of other big names, but family and friends. And so we walked behind the coffin into Arlington Cemetery to where he would be buried. And it was a terrific neighborhood. It was all the former secretaries of state are all buried on this wonderful hill in Arlington. And I must say that for all the things he had accomplished, I looked around and thought, oh, all the amazing things, it was like an Ozymandias moment thinking, I hope he's made peace with his creator, and I think he had. But for a long and fruitful life, I think he was just, for me, he was just a great mentor and a role model in a lot of ways, and really gave me some great advice throughout my career. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi.
My name is Ian. Thank you for coming to this talk.
Thank you, Ian.
I'm curious about the peace through strength policy.
Yeah.
You were part of, I know, currently we stand on what appears to be the brink of almost invasion of Venezuela to overthrow the president Maduro. We are continuing to engage in the Middle East and sometimes Israel. Following.
Could you put the mic a little closer? I'm having a little, my age, I can't hear much. There, good.
Okay.
So you're curious about?
I'm curious about the peace through strength policy. We are on the brink of invasion with Venezuela. We are moving troops out there at this moment. We continue to sell weapons to Israel. And following President Trump's peace deal, within 3 days, Israel had resumed their attacks on Palestinian people and in Gaza. What do you think of President Trump's war strategy here? You declared that he is making peace through economic means. How do you sort of square that with what appears to be still very active military engagement globally? Okay, so I would say, first of all, to peace through strength, it sounds like it's a bumper sticker, right? And by the way, the first person who used it was Reagan, and Trump used it again. But the peace through strength, everybody likes peace. And what's strength? Well, strength is always good, right? But it was never meant to just be military strength. It was always meant to be military, economic, technological, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what happened during Reagan, and that's what Trump meant. So peace through strength is our overall strength, not just our military strength. And so let's take Venezuela, for example. I would ask you, do you think it's okay that we're blowing up ships that are, they're carrying drugs on their way to the United States and we're blowing them up? Is that okay with you? I think it's extrajudicial violence.
You think it's good or bad?
I think it's bad. I think it's extrajudicial violence.
Okay, so you're against it.
Yes.
I would say, well, first of all, we have a long history of doing things like that. And in the first Trump term, he bombed the airfields in Syria because the Syrians were using those airfields to take off and then use chemical weapons against their own people. And the world applauded that. And you could say, well, that's extrajudicial. Maybe he didn't really have the permission to do it. But he did it. Actually, he does have the permission to do it under the War Powers Act. But I would say, it was okay somehow to protect Syrians from chemical weapons, but it's not okay to protect Americans from fentanyl. I would say that you have even more right to do it if it's to protect Americans. And I'm not losing a whole lot of sleep over drug lords who are getting blown up in the region. When you say about Maduro and what do we say? Well, first of all, we're not sending troops. We're sending aircraft carrier and a destroyer. We're not sending the Marines. We're making the point that we could. And then apparently President Trump has agreed to findings which allow the CIA to do like a pinprick military operation against drug things. Now, I think that the way warfare is conducted in the modern world is not German tanks over the border as much as it's drugs into the United States. It's pushing the fentanyl, the open border, the gangbangers, the drug lords. And so I don't have a problem with protecting the Americans from fentanyl. And maybe that isn't, you could get a bunch of lawyers to argue with it, but I think if you have a mother who's seen her kid die of fentanyl poisoning, she would be pulling the trigger. And so I don't have a problem with that. Now, when you say Palestinians, et cetera, and how terrible it was the Gaza peace deal, and within 3 days it started falling apart. I would point out now that it's back on now, and that no one assumed that it was going to be completely smooth and easy. And Where is the violence coming from? A lot of it is coming from Hamas, which is Hamas doing violence against the Palestinian people. And if you want to think about, well, who's really suffering here? I don't care about Hamas. I mean, they've shown themselves to be amoral killers and have their national policy, they brag about it, is to let their own people, their women and children, be hurt, slaughtered, human shields, so that they can use those bodies to win the PR war, because Hamas has said they know they can't beat Israel in a military engagement, but they could beat them in a public relations deal. And so that was what they were going for. I would say I really believe in the Palestinian people. I don't believe in Hamas. But if there's a way to separate Hamas from the Palestinian people so that the Palestinian people have a future, they have no future now. I mean, Hamas, you know, all this, I mean, even the UN has come out and said that Hamas was stealing the food that was meant to go to the Palestinian people, that they were taking it, they were selling it on the black market, and that they were exploiting their own people. I don't have a lot of problems with Hamas being sort of aced out of governance of the Palestinian people, where they're not allowed to be part of any ongoing government in Gaza. They have to lay down their arms. And it's not just Israel that's going to force it. It's going to be all the countries of the region. Probably Israel will have much of a less role than Turkey and UAE and others to put down Hamas. So if what your goal is to protect Hamas, you're welcome to it. My goal would be to protect the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people now, 90% of their country is in rubble, and it has to be rebuilt, and 97% of their people are unemployed. Now, how are you going to deal with that? I think the best prospect for dealing for the Palestinian people is get Hamas out of the way, and then have the other countries in the region establish some sort of stabilization force. It's going to be called a stabilization force. And then other countries in the region, not us, but other countries, UAE and others, have offered to pay to rebuild society, rebuild functioning society. And then if your goal is peace for the Palestinian people, I think that's a far better option for the Palestinian people than to continue to do what has been done time and time again, where Hamas has a stranglehold over its own people. What's happening now is that Palestinians are turning in Hamas because they're not happy. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
What did we think? Time to go home? We had enough? I just want to thank you. It takes a lot of guts on any college campus today to have a political opinion. And particularly to the young Republicans, and you know, you're the worst position of all, right? Everybody thinks you're a bad person, right? Bad man. And I think it takes an enormous amount of personal courage. And the fact that you're doing what you're doing, the fact that you've invited me, the fact that a lot of you who don't agree with me have come and are, you know, gonna go with me, you know, mano a mano, I think it's terrific. Because a college campus is supposed to be where you debate the ideas peacefully, respectfully, fiercely, but that's what this is, an education. That's what it's all about. It's not what you're going to necessarily learn in the classroom. Please don't have your professors come and talk to me. But it's what you're learning like this, because you're learning to think for yourselves and have your own opinions. And maybe you change your opinion. Maybe your opinion that you had before is reinforced by coming to something like this. But I really thank you and I applaud you, because there are not a lot of places in the country that are doing this right now. And you are. So I expect great things from all of you when you graduate into this whole wild new world in a year or two, and I hope you all get jobs. Thank you very much, and it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.